together. So I want to start at the end, and then we're going to work our way back toward the beginning, because I think the end of this gospel is the one that kind of raises some questions, right? Because there's like this little bit of magic formula almost on this, that if two of you agree and you ask God, then that's what's going to happen. But it's not quite that simple, is it? I can find one person to agree with me on a lot of things, and guess what? It doesn't make me get my way. I can tell you that there are a couple different people that have agreed on things in this congregation, and it's still, like a magic potion, hasn't happened that way. Because Jesus isn't talking about the magic formula of God working for us to get our will done, which takes us to the verse just previous to that, where Jesus says, "Truly I tell you, whatever is loosed on earth will be loosed in heaven, and whatever is bound on earth will be bound in heaven," which again makes it sound like we are the ones in control. But first we read this in the whole context of Matthew, especially the 18th chapter. And second, we look a little bit more at the Greek. So I'm going to bore some of you for a quick minute. But the verb, whatever you do here, will be here. We take that as kind of a simple future tense. But in the Greek, it's called a future passive participle, something along those lines. And so it's not whatever happens here will be done there, but it's whatever happens here will be like what is happening in heaven. Do you hear the difference there? It's not about us being in control, but it's very much like what Jesus has taught us already in Matthew to pray. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And that's what Jesus is reminding this community today. He has been in the whole chapter of 18 teaching people how to live in community, teaching people how to make sure they gather in those who are weak in faith, who don't have anyone to rely on, teaching people about how when the one sheep goes astray, we go and we do anything we can to pull that sheep back in. And in this gospel lesson that sounds like a magic potion or that we are in control because, let's be honest, don't we love life that way? Jesus is really reminding us that our call is to help have God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So we listen to this, and God tells us how to work in community, right? If you have a problem with somebody, talk to them. And if that fails, try again with more people and broaden that. And then did you hear what Jesus said at the end? If they still won't listen, treat them like Gentiles and tax collectors. Do you know how Jesus showed them to treat Gentiles and tax collectors? Do you remember what Jesus did with the tax collector? He sat down and ate with him. He showed him God's love. Do you remember what God did, what Jesus did with the Gentiles? When the Israelites were thinking God's promise is only for us, Jesus said, let's welcome them all. So when Jesus says, if people don't agree with you, if they're not listening to you, if they're not having things your way, treat them like Gentiles and tax collectors. Bring them in. Show them God's love. Well, holy smokes, does that not tie in so well with what Dave read to us today? Did you hear Paul? I have to say I love this part of Romans because if you listen to Paul, he says, remember those commandments, the one Jesus gave? And he starts listing them. You shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, and anything else Jesus told you. I mean, he's like, yeah, you don't have to know the Big Ten. This is what you need to know. Those commandments say to love one another. And if you listen to the psalm, remember we said over and over again, teach me to know and love your commandments. Teach me, God, to love other people as you have loved me. And then you go back even to Ezekiel, in a time where God's people were so focused on themselves and couldn't remember God's commandment. And God said, you know what? I don't understand you all. I told you from the beginning, you have this great choice between life and death. Please don't choose death. Please don't push people out. Choose life. Bring this love to everyone. And that's what I love about this day, is because we, as a community, individually, do a lot of amazing things in our community. But today, we get to go out and see some of the amazing places in our community that reach those who maybe feel like they're Gentiles or tax collectors. And we get the opportunity to say, hey, Gentiles and tax collectors, God says, come on in. So as we talk about this God that is love, and this God that calls us to serve, all right, who paid attention to the opening hymn really closely? Man, y'all, because, it struck me immediately. I love, even if you don't like to sing, if you can't stand the organ, you can't stand the praise band, you can't stand whatever about music, read the words, because they tell a story, and they most often even tie into what's happening in the sermon. They tell the same story. They work together. But if you'd watched in the opening hymn, it caught my eye immediately because I wondered if it was a misprint. 2 different places in the hymn, love has a capital L instead of a lowercase. And that word love in that opening hymn was replacing God's name. God is love. We sing it, we say it, and even when we see it, it sometimes goes right over our head. That blatant reminder that God is love. And that God says, I love you so much. I call you precious child. And there's nothing you can do to stop that. And not only that, but I give you this light to shine so that you can make sure that the tax collectors, that the Gentiles, that the Ohio State fans, they know that they're part of God's love. That's good news. And so, as we reflect on this day and work hard together, that's awesome. But what I really want this day to do is to stir this passion in you, to be reminded that we've got this awesome job together. To bring people to this place, to let them know their love, and to help them know and then continue sending that love throughout the world. And so we continue to hear today about God's love in our hands and our feet. And that is good news. God is love. Go make sure everyone knows that.